For generations of viewers, Tom Silva wasn't just a contractor on television. He was a symbol of steadiness in a chaotic world. While trends shifted and reality TV grew louder, Tom's presence remained calm, measured, and reassuring. His voice never rushed. His explanations never talked down. And that quiet consistency made people trust him with something deeply personal, their homes. But what audiences didn't see was the cost of carrying that trust for decades. Behind the careful demonstrations and composed expressions was a man absorbing pressure that never made it into the final edit. This isn't a story about sudden downfall or scandal. It's about endurance. About what happens when someone spends a lifetime holding standards in an industry that keeps trying to move faster. As time passed, viewers sensed changes. Longer pauses, fewer words, moments of reflection that felt heavier than before. Those weren't signs of decline. They were signs of weight. And to understand what truly happened to Tom Silva, you have to look beyond the screen, into a life built on responsibility long before cameras arrived. Tom Silva's story begins far from television studios, rooted in a childhood where work wasn't a phase, it was a way of life. Raised in Massachusetts, Tom grew up in a family where skill was earned through repetition, not praise. His father built things with his hands and expected his sons to learn the same way, by doing. There were no shortcuts, no excuses, and no applause. Meanwhile, his mother and grandmother worked patiently as seamstresses, teaching a different kind of discipline, precision, focus, and quiet endurance. These influences shaped Tom long before he understood their importance. Summers weren't spent relaxing. They were filled with renovation projects, repairs, and learning how mistakes could cost real money and real trust. Growing up among brothers meant constant motion, something always being built, fixed, or torn apart to be done better. Instruction was rarely verbal. Lessons came through action. By the time Tom was old enough to carry tools, craftsmanship was already part of his identity. This foundation didn't just teach him how to build structures. It taught him how to build character. One childhood experience left a particularly lasting mark on Tom Silva, an event shaped by fear, uncertainty, and determination. His family lived in a centuries-old colonial home, and during the height of Cold War anxiety, they decided to build a fallout shelter beneath it. This wasn't a professional project. It was a family response to a world that suddenly felt fragile. Tom and his brothers dug, reinforced, and sealed that underground space with limited resources but complete commitment. For a young Tom, the lesson wasn't about survival from a nuclear threat that never came. It was about the power of preparation. He saw firsthand how structure could bring comfort, how building something solid could quiet fear. That realization followed him into adulthood. It shaped how he approached every home, every beam, every system hidden behind walls. To Tom, construction wasn't just technical, it was emotional. Houses weren't objects. They were shelters against uncertainty, and that belief would later clash hard with the realities of television. After school, Tom never wandered in search of purpose. He stepped directly into construction, joining his father's work without hesitation. By then, the trade wasn't new, it was embedded in him. He understood how materials aged, how old homes carried stories within their walls, and why rushing always led to regret. When Tom and his brother later founded Silva Brothers Construction, growth was never the goal. Reputation was. They worked quietly, taking on projects that demanded patience and accountability. When mistakes happened, they stayed. That mindset set Tom apart in an industry often driven by speed and profit. Long before television noticed him, homeowners trusted him. That trust became his currency. So when television eventually came calling, it didn't feel like opportunity, it felt like risk. Tom Silva never chased the spotlight. In fact, he actively resisted it. When the chance to appear on television first arose, his answer was simple: no. Running a construction company required full attention, and he wasn't willing to sacrifice real work for appearances. The idea of cameras on job sites felt intrusive, even dangerous. His reputation was built on results, not performance. But television didn't find Tom through auditions, it found him through proximity. Living next door to a producer meant his work was observed in real conditions, where mistakes had consequences. When cameras finally arrived, there was no script, no rehearsal. Tom was simply asked to do what he always did, and that authenticity changed everything. What producers captured wasn't a personality, it was a process. Tom explained decisions as he made them, not to impress, but to clarify. He didn't simplify for drama or exaggerate for effect. He admitted uncertainty when it existed and emphasized patience when speed would have looked better on screen. Viewers responded instantly. By the late 1980s, Tom had become a central figure, not because he demanded attention, but because he earned trust. He wasn't teaching projects. He was teaching thinking, and that made him invaluable. As the show grew, so did the pressure behind the scenes. Television demanded tighter schedules, cleaner narratives, and faster progress. For Tom, these weren't minor adjustments, they were ethical challenges. Construction doesn't compress neatly into time slots. Some problems take as long as they take, and Tom refused to misrepresent that reality. Quiet disagreements turned into ongoing tension. He pushed back when timelines became unrealistic. He resisted staging work out of order. To him, implying shortcuts meant teaching millions the wrong lessons. These conflicts weren't dramatic. They were persistent, and they took a toll. At one point, Tom made his position clear. If integrity couldn't be maintained, he would walk away. Not as a threat, but as a boundary. The producers understood what was at stake. Losing Tom meant losing credibility, so they backed down. On screen, nothing changed. Off-screen, Tom learned how fragile integrity could be when entertainment entered the equation. The pressure never fully disappeared. Years later, exhaustion set in. Tom quietly considered leaving the show, not because he stopped caring, but because caring required constant defense. Around the same time, tragedy struck close to home. A devastating fire destroyed his brother's house, one Tom had worked on for years. Standing among the ruins, he faced a truth no skill could undo. Some losses can't be fixed. That fire changed him. It made him more cautious, more deliberate. Homes became even more personal. Risk was no longer theoretical. It had names, memories, and consequences. Years later, another loss followed, the sudden death of a young crew member Tom had mentored. This loss hit deeper than any professional challenge. For the first time, he questioned whether he could continue. As Tom entered his 70s, his body began to reflect the cost of decades of labor. Multiple back surgeries forced him to slow down. He adapted quietly, delegating more, planning carefully, protecting what his body could no longer afford to lose. Viewers noticed changes, but explanations never came. That silence was intentional. Talk of retirement surfaced, but Tom rejected the idea of fully walking away. To him, construction wasn't something you retired from. It was a responsibility you carried as long as you could contribute meaningfully. In 2025, Tom addressed the issue directly. He confirmed he would remain involved, not as before, but as a mentor, advisor, and guardian of standards. The relief among colleagues said everything. Around that same time, a long-held secret quietly surfaced. For decades, Tom had been privately funding disaster recovery efforts, rebuilding homes destroyed by fires and natural disasters. No cameras, no credit. The families helped were asked only for silence, not secrecy, but humility. Tom believed real help didn't need witnesses. So what really happened to Tom Silva? Nothing collapsed, nothing exploded, there was no scandal. What happened unfolded slowly, through responsibility, loss, resistance, and care. He carried integrity in an industry that moved faster every year. He absorbed quiet battles, so viewers could trust what they learned. And in the end, Tom Silva didn't fade away. He remained, steady, principled, and quietly rebuilding far more than houses.